Hi, everyone, on this April 25th Earthfiles YouTube channel. It's a beautiful evening here in Albuquerque, except that we haven't had rain for so long and everything is getting so dry that we are beginning to worry about what the fire season is going to be like. And I know that the people who have been communicating with me from Oregon about the problems of seeing hummingbirds and the animals that they have normally seen by this time of year. In some places, they say that some are coming back, in others not, that there was an appearance of hummingbirds and then they just disappeared entirely. These are emails just as recently as a few days ago, and it is compelling to me to try to keep hearing from all of you, no matter where you are, to let me know if there is news in your local area about a big change in the animals, the birds, what is happening, because this is something that I think we all should try to help each other stay on top of. And the whole series that I have been doing at Earthfiles about something strange in Oregon, I have been hearing emails from people in many parts of the country and other parts of the world, all saying that things are not normal where they are. So in this revolutionary time, and we're almost at the 1st of May, my thoughts have been turning to crop formations, which usually in the past, going back to the beginning of the 1990s, have started first in Germany and England by the first week of May. And it's been in that beautiful yellow flowering oilseed rape that we call canola in the United States. The first canola formations are important for people to look for breaks or cracks in the down crop stems, because oilseed rape is like a thin celery stalk. You can hit it, you can walk through it, it will crack, it will break, it's full of water. The flowers are just full of yellow pollen and it drenches anyone who walks through it. I once had on a blue, it was like a rain jacket, light, and jeans. And I went to investigate an oilseed rape formation. And by the time I got to the formation, I was literally yellow, as if somebody had sprayed me with a spray can of yellow on the navy blue. That's how thick the pollen is. And this is why the crop formations in the early part of the spring in England and Germany and anywhere else are significant, because if they can put down something that's 500 or 400 feet in diameter, and it has intricate geometry, which has happened in the past few years, and there are no marks of feet, then it is something extraordinary, because nobody can move into oilseed rape without having pollen come on them, and then there's a green trail, and you can't replace that yellow pollen. That's why these oilseed rape formations are really important. And by June in England, that's when barley crops are waving in the breeze, and the next patterns where really the biggest activity has usually have been in the wheat fields. And in the late 1980s, when there were huge patterns in Cheesefoot Head and Warminster, England, there had been no news about hoaxers, no evidence of counterintelligence efforts to muddy the waters to try to explain this truly profound and beautiful mystery phenomena as hoaxers. That would not begin for 3 or 4 years. And people forget that in the year 1991 to 1992, the summer of 1991, complex crop formations have been reported around the world in 23 countries, including watery rice paddies in Japan. I still remember the first photo from Japan, and it was it was intricate with a circle and corridor and some of the geometry patterns that we were seeing also in England and Germany and other places. And that made it even more preposterous when on September 10th, 1991, a TV station in England trotted out two elderly gentlemen named Doug and Dave. And the two men said on TV that was broadcast that the answer to the crop mystery was their work. Now, even their wives told reporters that these two men had only made some circles in Somerset County, where most of the activity was in Wiltshire, and let alone that there had been 23 countries reporting headlines that were being picked up by 60 Minutes and 2020 and networks around the planet. People forget this was a genuine phenomenon, and it was happening within 1 week. It could be all around the planet. And so for those of us who were studying and following it, the idea that two men would stand up in front of a TV camera in England and say they were responsible for this global phenomenon, it was preposterous, not true. And what made it weirder is that media like the New York Times, I still remember somewhere in my files, I kept that New York Times, because after that September 10th press conference, on, I think it was page 2, above the fold on page 2, mystery, crop circle mystery solved. Well, there was no investigation. There was nothing but Associated Press or media just exchanging stories from this interview in England with these two men who were not the answer to any of the worldwide phenomena. To this day, I have always wondered, why didn't at least the New York Times and the Guardian in London send some reporters to Wiltshire and Somerset and southern England and Germany and places where the formations were occurring and do some on-the-ground investigations? They would have come away knowing that they weren't dealing with a phenomenon that could be explained by two men taking poles in their feet and trudging through on the ground, especially not in the canola, the rapeseed. Well, it was all the way to 2000, so about 10 years later. This is probably one of the most significant and memorable events that I ever had in my investigations of crop formations. And it was August 4th, 2000. It began at 1 o'clock in the morning and went for an hour, 1 to 2 a.m. And this was in the famous East Field of Alton Barnes. The day before, there had been British Army helicopters with yellow tops and bellies flying low over the East Field, West Stowell, Woodborough Hill, or in all of these places that are right around that big East Field in Woodborough Hill. For people who have been going to England several times in the last 20-some years, they know exactly that one of the center points for crop formations, and very complex crop formations, whether in oilseed rape or barley or wheat, would be East Field to Woodborough Hill. That is the central heart of Alton Barnes, and it's also where the famous barge inn was that we would all hang out summer by summer by summer, going in to have dinner and then going out to do night watches in the fields and seeing strange orange lights, seeing strange craft, actually. I saw things that had to be structured, but I didn't know what it was, and sometimes we were looking at them through infrared. And this is what happened on this date, on this night, 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. Now, we were there because of all the Army helicopter activity that day. And over the 10 years, we had learned when helicopters would come in and come down low over formations, there were formations in some of the fields, and rise up and go down low and rise up like they were looking for something. We'd seen this before. And so there was this sense that there was a military reaction to something that we could not see with our human eyes, that they were chasing or trying to find. And this day, the day before, on August 3rd, 2000, the fields had been covered by helicopters. That's why we're there and why we're doing a night watch. And then adding to the drama of it all, and actually adding to the mystery of what happens next, is that in the late afternoon of August 3rd, 2000, the skies open up in a drenching thunderstorm. The roads filled up. The east field, there is a slant that goes down toward Ore, and those roads had filled up with water. When the people that I was with that night going into August 4th, when we got there, we went to the higher ground just to get away from all of the water that was in all of the fields from the late afternoon thunderstorm after all the helicopters. So now, imagine, I had that summer of 2000, I had been able to get a loan from a man who had served in the military, and he said, I want you to take, this is a sophisticated military infrared star scope, and it has great optics, and it really did. And I had been able to travel with it wrapped up in some good soft protection in a suitcase that summer, because that was the summer before 9/11 the next year. After 9/11, I could never ever, without a formal letter from the State Department, I could never have gotten that military infrared star scope through a suitcase. It would have been confiscated. And I know that for a fact because in 2001, I wanted to take it back to England, or 2002, after 9/11. I wanted to take it in the summer of 2002, and I was told that I would have to get an official letter from the State Department. So this is before all of that occurred. And there were 7 total of us, 6 of my dear good friends in England, and we were now on this high ground where some people who have been there know that there are tires and it's a pull-off place, and that's where we went. And I lifted up this military grade infrared star scope. It was long, and it had lens changes, and you could change the frequency that you were in. And we started looking out into what seemed like a dark, dark blackness, because there was no starlight. There were still clouds from after the rain. There was cloud, like fog in the background. It seemed like it was there low. No lights anywhere. We were just in real thick darkness. And when I pulled up that scope, and I'm looking out across the east field, because we knew where there had been helicopters, we knew where there were some formations, and there was a specific line of sight that we wanted to look at, specifically at the bottom of the Golden Ball Hill area, right next to the big east field. And as I raised up this scope, all of a sudden I still can remember, it was so astonishing, this oval, white, bright, in the frequency that I had the scope in, just popped in. It wasn't like something moved. It was like it knew exactly where I was aimed, and it literally popped in. And I was so astonished. I handed the scope to whoever was next to me, the 6 other people and myself, total of 7 of us. And everybody was saying, my God, everybody's looking at it. What? And we look, and there's nothing but black, solid black. But inside the scope was this bright oval. The scope came back to me. I'm looking at it when, as if it knows everything that's happening, and we must have been at least 500 feet, 600 feet from this area that we were aimed at across the east field. The oval begins to do this: jump, 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 from side to side within the scope. And I remember thinking immediately, it's not going outside of the scope. How in the world, whatever we are dealing with, how is it keeping inside of the scope? Passed it around. Everybody now is watching it jump back and forth. And then one of the group started yelling, "We're not afraid of you. Please come forward." And then all of us started saying, "Yeah, please show us. We can't see you except in this scope. Can you do something to show us that we can see with our eyes?" And honest to Pete, at that moment when we're all saying that, we all saw this, and we all said to it, "Did you see that?" Was a flash of red, this color, the color of my shirt. But it was instant, but we all saw that flash of red in that deep, dank, wet darkness. Then the scope comes back to me. We just kept passing it in a circle. I'm now looking. The other people have got a lot of courage now. Nothing is going on. So they are really beginning to get loud about whatever this is that we can see through the scope to reveal itself. And what had been this oval that was jumping back and forth before my very eyes changed from this to a perfect square. And it had scintillation to it. And it looked to me the way if you held a mirror at an angle to the sun, like at noontime, and you did this, and it would flicker, just like a mirror flickering, except it is a square that was an oval that was bouncing, and now it's the square right inside of the scope. Pass it around. Everybody is seeing it. Everybody starts. I remember 3 or 4. There was a mix. There was like half and half men and women, and one of the girls started really loudly, almost like screaming in enthusiasm. That was the mode. And as she starts doing that, a high-pitched voice, come closer so we can see what you are. The scope comes back to me, and now I am looking at the flickering square, and it begins to pulse. It's pulsing. When I think back at what I saw, was it sending, I don't know, binary code, and none of us thought about it? But it had a pulse to it, a strange pulse. It was an erratic pulse, in addition to all of the mirror flickering. And we pass it around, and this is now a whole hour. We've been doing this from 1 a.m. It is now 2 a.m. And I know that I have to get into a red phone box to call Art Bell, because I was scheduled to do a coast-to-coast AM with him from England back to the United States. And at that time of the year, in the time zones, I was scheduled to make a connection with Art somewhere around 3:30 to tell him where I was and to give him the phone so that he could call me back. And the idea is we would go live at 4 a.m. my time, which was, I think it was 11 p.m. or something in the United States, 10 or 11. And in those days, we did 5 hours of coast. So I am thinking we've got to get to a phone booth at some point here. And as I'm thinking that, whether or not it has anything to do with telepathic downloads and communications with something as strange as this, it was just about 2 o'clock, and I'm thinking about I've got to get this radio thing organized. And the square, which was vivid, and we were all watching it, changing around, it was very vivid and pulsing. Suddenly, it went from a square back to that white oval, and then the white oval started jumping back and forth, and it slowed down. We all saw it, this, like it was transitioning, letting all of us keep looking at it for like a minute a piece or 30 seconds a piece, and everybody was very good at continually handling, so we'd have reality checks. It came back to me. I'm looking at the scope. I'm watching the oval jump. And then it was one last jump. And the scope went dark, total black. And I handed it around. Everybody, no, it's not there. So what we did as a group is we went to a red phone box in Alton Barnes. I called Art earlier and I said, here's the situation. We've just had the most extraordinary group experience in the East Field. He said, I'm going to put you on earlier. We lined up. I'm inside so I can do the answers, and my 6 friends lined up, and each one got into that phone booth, person by person, told exactly what they had seen, what we had experienced. And when we had gone through everybody's testimonies, Art said, Linda, I think this is one of the most exciting broadcasts I've ever done. And he meant, because this is real time, this was real world, we were experiencing legitimate phenomena that was hugely strange, and we had no answers for it, but there were seven of us who were eyewitnesses who got in one by one in that red telephone booth and gave our stories. And to this day, I still will get an occasional email from people, whether they were in the United States or Australia or New Zealand or Europe, and they will say, do you remember that night that a group of you were out in the East Field after it had rained and you had that star scope and this thing was jumping? Well, for those of you who are subscribers to my news website, earthfiles.com, if you will go to the search at Earthfiles and you type in, it is the East Field pulsing light. And if you do that in the search, you can read and see the sketches that I made that night, and then I formalized them when I got back to the United States and did that earthfiles.com. It's a big report. It starts with the photographs of the helicopters that we took that afternoon that were coming down into the crop formations and doing this, and they were clearly Army. And then the illustrations of what we were seeing as it kept transitioning. It was, of all the years, and I started going to England on a yearly basis in 1992. And so this was 2000. And then I went 4 or 5 years from 2000 on. And I still think of this as being one of those events that kind of punctures the paradigm that you think that you're living in when you have 7 people who are seeing something that strange through a high military grade instrument. And that's why it's very difficult for those of us who were going into the crop formation fields from the late 1980s, for my case, starting in 1992 and doing it for several years. One strange event after another, seeing some of those orange lights moving in the night over the fields, seeing an event like that through a star scope, hearing very odd breathing sounds also after midnight in a field where there had been a crop formation. All kinds of phenomena that could never, ever be explained by the 2 men from Somerset County that I was told later that somebody had proof that somebody from MI6 or one of the intel agencies in the UK, probably backed by the United States, had paid those men money to stand in front of a camera and basically lie. Well, there may have been some, we'll call it, reasoning on the part of the political systems in the UK and the US that, just like with crop formations and human abductions and UFOs and Sasquatch and the list goes on, that there are political power leaders that have been making the decisions about what humanity should know about and what they should not. And in my case, I think all of you certainly coming to Earthfiles YouTube channel and to the whole planet, that everybody should know that the crop formations are a legitimate phenomena, and that many, for 2 or 3 decades, were not in any way, shape, or form made by humans. That's the part that I went to study and others have gone to study. But there definitely was an insertion of what I call muddying the waters. It happened for the first time from around 1993, 94, 95. That's when it really started to kick in. And that's when people were being paid by people that we know were working for like special ops in the UK and the US government. And their job was to keep the public and the media away from and taking seriously crop formations. The question is, why? One of the few answers ever given to me that makes some sense, even though it's not a satisfying answer because it's not translated. In 1993, I was out in a formation in a wheat field, and I was introduced to a person who allegedly came from the United States, who said that they were just interested in crop formations as something beautiful to go in, and that they were there with their family and friends. But when everybody went away and it was just him and me, he said, "There's something that maybe you should know." Very, very like insider whisper. He said, "A good friend." And when somebody says good friend, I'm pretty sure they mean themselves. He said, "A good friend of mine in Washington said that the Central Intelligence Agency has been working with a lot of Cray computers, trying by satellite to photograph every crop formation that appears around the world in whichever hemisphere and at whatever timeline. And that the goal is to feed all of the information into the Crays, looking for a mathematical language that could be translated." And he said, "It's my understanding that the current hypothesis is that whoever is making the crop formations around the world are time travelers using the patterns to determine how effective they are in moving backwards and forwards in time." So now, what I'd like to do tonight is take some of your live questions through Lori, and then next week or so, I'll go back to the questions that we have been gathering from you, which are so fascinating. But tonight, let's go with some of your live questions, Lori.
Thanks, Linda. We have a fantastic group tonight, and we would like to first thank everyone for their amazing chats. Minnesota Folk, Leo Almond, Rick Buggy, Casey Kaufman would like a shout out, Angie C., and Jane Doe. So we've got a lot of super generous fans tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of you who are here and listening. It is, I cannot tell you, my path is a difficult one. It has been a difficult one for 40 years, trying to get to the bottom of all of these expanding facets of a highly strange phenomenon. And there's nothing else that I would rather do But it does take a toll. It takes a toll in many, many ways. It is often, I think of myself trying to run through a landscape that is filled with razor blades. And so for those of you out there who are coming and listening, and that when you give these chat supports, you have no idea how good that feels at this point in 2018, when we have had 70 years of policies of denial and lies, and that some of us, we have been attacked and called all kinds of names, when the only thing that I have ever tried to do is bring the pressure of fact and truth about an alien presence that has been affecting this earth for not just since World War II, but for centuries, and as one DIA guy told me, at least 270 million years. I think you deserve to know that truth, and it is what I keep trying as hard as I can to break open more ground as we go. So thank you.
Here is our first question tonight, Linda. Could crop circles be a form of self-activating software, like in one of the drones that you talked about in your book?
For those of you who have seen my DVD having to do with Gobekli, a 12,000-year-old ancient site in Turkey, where I went in June of 2012, and when I went there, why the self-activating software just seemed to be ringing in my mind constantly as I was there. If you rack the timeline back to 2007 to 2008, that is the period when what I called and reported as the Dragonfly Drones, because they look something like a dragonfly. A circle in the front, wire coming up, sort of like antenna, long body. The long body had variations on the tail, sometimes a circle and sometimes other things, and strange symbols underneath the body, strange symbols on boxes on the sides where the circle was. All of that emerged for the very first time in any of the professional work that I had done on high strangeness in that 2007 to 2008 time period. And for those who were following my work then, you know that I had a whistleblower. He was working for Homeland Security. He was in the Southeast. He said to me in a series of emails and then in recorded interviews that he had seen one of these small version of a Dragonfly drone where they had 30-some infrared cameras that he operated for some unknown reason, never explained, and that he proceeded to keep having interactions that involved some kind of telepathic download having to do with the Greek civilization having been ETs. And that's where the term Oltesis came in. And in the process of doing that work and looking at these symbols that were in patterns on these strange dragonfly drones, and working with an astrophysicist, working with mathematicians, working with others, I think this is part of the reason why that in the summer of, I believe it was 2008, that I got, and Lex at Coast to Coast, we both got emails from somebody calling themselves Isaac. And the emails came with a document, and it said, I would like to see this put on your websites, meaning Earthfiles and Coast to Coast, as long as you do not change or alter a word, a page, a diagram, a photograph. If you will put them out and I will know I'm going to be watching. And if there's any variation on my request, I will make sure that the link to the URL that has this document will be taken down. So Lexit Coast and I, we put this up. And the feedback that I started to get, confidential, people saying, you need to know, but you can never use my name or my affiliation. I had university professors. I had people in we'll just say computer companies. They started sending me, we know that what Isaac is releasing is true. And they were giving me their reasons for why and documentation in some cases. And that gave me the courage and the confidence to keep going in spite of all kinds of attacks, trying to insist that this was CGI for a Xbox game, and I knew that was not true. So I kept reporting in spite of all of the pushback on the fact that there were more and more of these Dragonfly drones that were being seen, a few times photographed and being described. And all of this paralleled work that we began to start doing on RAF Bentwaters, in which Peniston was, by 2010, was saying and showing us a binary code in his notebook for the first time. Imagine these parallel tracks all moving forward in which binary code, embedded language, Isaac's calling this self-activating software. And I still think that one of the most important communications that he gave is when I had emailed a question to him, if he could please explain what he meant by self-activating software, that the drones were in the air, operating, flickering in and out, becoming invisible, doing all the strange things that they did because they were self-activating software. And he gave me an analogy, and I'll share that with you so that as we go forward, whenever you hear me or anybody talk about self-activating software, remember this from Isaac. He said, imagine, he said, you work at a computer or a typewriter and you want something to be on paper, not through email. And you want that paper to be in a building that is 3 blocks away on the 5th floor in Jane Doe's office at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, the self-activating software that I'm talking about, that I worked as a scientist for a Department of Defense laboratory investigation underground in Palo Alto, California, where Stanford University is. And we were trying to crack the code, the embedded code, and realizing it was built into the atomic level of the substance of anything we had. So in a strange way, like a hologram, you would have all of this code and information, the self-activating software, even in a small piece of one of the bigger pieces that they were examining. They were astonished by what they kept learning and they could not duplicate it. But, he said, so the paper, Linda, it's like you pick up a piece of paper. It is a self-activating software because it is made out of material that has been encoded with, we'll call it zeros and ones. And it may also be coded to match the brain waves in your brain. So you only have to think, like telepathic. You think, you look at the look at the paper, let's say it's a white sheet of paper. You look at that piece of paper, you think exactly who, when, what, and even the information, and then you let it go. Because the paper will know how to neutralize gravity, will know how to go It will form whatever you have asked in substance and content. It will appear at exactly the moment that you have set in time. It will be right at the person that you have wanted 2 blocks down and 5 stories up. It will know how to do all of that by itself and return to you with an answer in whatever form you wanted, in code, in type language, whatever. When you start to absorb that, mull it over in your mind, think that we are moving now rapidly in a world of artificial intelligence, and think of Isaac describing that he worked for 3 or 4 years in an underground laboratory in what was called the Carrot program. And its goal was commercial application research of extraterrestrial technology. That is the acronym CARROT. And that was in the 80s. Where are we today? And what technology are we already going to be able to use on Mars and the Moon that hasn't been introduced to Earth yet? Lori, do we have time for one more question?
I think everybody would be okay with that.
Okay.
Let's try this one. Do you think Gobekli Tepe was carefully buried to cover it up so it could survive past pole shifts?
That's a really good question. I have talked about Gobekli Tepe with a whistleblower. The answer is complex. I am working on a presentation that I would like to start giving maybe later this year or certainly by 2019 that goes into exactly more details on that question. Tonight, what I'll say is we are on an unstable planet. There are cycles of geophysical catastrophes, from earthquakes to volcanoes. We know that cometary debris and asteroid debris have come periodically and hit on this planet, and that even the wipeout of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago is supposed to be because of a approximately 6-mile diameter asteroid piece hit into the Gulf of Mexico. Gobekli Tepe fits into a hypothesis by scientists in Arizona. I've interviewed them. I think there are 2 reports in depth at Earthfiles having to do with what happened in North America 11,500 years ago, which is approximately the same time that Gobekli Tepe would have to have been covered up. It was made, according to the archaeologists, 12,000 years ago, and then completely buried by next 500 or 1,000 years, but they say 1,000 years later. So the timeline here is close to what the physicists are studying in Arizona and the timeline the archaeologists give for Gobekli Tepe. And for those who may not be aware, Gobekli Tepe has 300 19-ton, 15-ton tall limestone pillars that are placed in rings, a whole series of rings. It's not on a hilltop. The hilltop is here. I stood there facing the sun on the June 12th, 13th of 2012. You have to walk down. It's another hill, but it's surrounded by hills. Then you're at the top of, we'll call it a lower hill. That's where Gobekli Tepe is. And the entire hill there is covered with these rings of these tall, tall limestones. They are so heavy. They are carved with creatures that nobody recognizes. And you look at those rings, you look at the creatures on them, and in some cases very odd symbols on some of the pillars. And I had a discussion with this physicist that I'm going to hopefully be doing a lot more work with. And he said his guess is that it was an extraterrestrial created site for reasons that would have to do with communication with pyramids and energy. And that the creators would know if there was something coming in, astronomically or otherwise, that could be a threat to what they had built. And that the scientists in Phoenix and Tucson, they think that it was a series of pieces of either a comet or an asteroid that slammed into the North American side of the planet with such pressure that it created nanodiamonds from the heat and the pressure, covering literally hundreds, thousands of square miles, going through most of the middle of the United States, all the way up into Canada. There's been investigations it may go down into Mexico. And at exactly that same time of the mystery of Gobekli Tepe having been covered, about 1,000 years after the whole huge thing had been built, it gets covered at the same time that the scientists say that this incoming astronomical event hit in North America. And what also happened 11 to 12,000 years ago in North America? That's when 33 large mammals went extinct. One of those was the Saber-Tooth Tiger, this huge, huge, vigorous, strong animal. And in some of the investigations by scientists over the last 20, 30, 40 years, they have found skeletons of saber-toothed tigers in which the entire big, long spine is twisted 180 degrees right at the middle of the animal. They don't know what force would do that. So something between 11,000 years ago and 12,000 years ago impacted big pressure and heat on the North American side. On the other side, where the Mediterranean and Turkey and Gobekli Tepe would be, just north, we still had a lot of ice. The height of the last ice age was 18,000 years ago. By 12,000 years, it was warming up. And there had been a lot of melt, and around the Mediterranean, it was dry. But if you are an advanced intelligence, and you are here on Earth with self-activating software, and creating grids of pyramids above the surface and below the surface that are echoing between the moon and Mars and who knows, connected to what else. And that it isn't just Earth physics. It is Earth as a spherical planetary body in a grid with a lot of other locations. We're not thinking in that size yet, because we humans have been kept dumb and blind. We're not supposed to know. Well, if there's ever been a time on Earth where humanity deserves to know what the real relationship is between pyramids, the Gobekli Tepe, the moon, Mars, and beyond, and everything that has been working as a cosmic grid, not just Earth. It's now. It is right now, 2018. So I hope in these discussions with you at Earthfiles on this YouTube channel that what I'm interested in sharing with you is what I truly am interested in my own work. And I hope that it resonates with all of you, and that there will be feedback from you about your own high strangeness in your life, and that your questions to me are helping me move forward, because these are difficult subjects. And sometimes it's hard to know what to talk about with the public. And all of you are helping me to keep going forward step by step, expanding this more and more. So I look forward to your feedback on tonight. And may, the month of May, bring us some really, really substantial crop formations, whether it's Europe, Canada, the United States, or wherever in the Northern Hemisphere, because it's going to winter in the Southern Hemisphere now. And that we can move on beyond having hoax be the answer to legitimate interactions with an alien presence. Because there is one or more alien presences interacting with our planet now, in the past, the present, and in the future. So thanks for being with me tonight, and we'll pick up another subject next Wednesday.